Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today we have Kara Goldin with us. Very excited to have Kara on the show. She's the founder and CEO of Hint Incorporated, best known for its award-winning Hint Water, the leading unsweetened flavored water, and the author of the book Undaunted, Overcoming Doubts and Doubters. She's an active speaker and writer and hosts the podcast The Kara Goldin Show, where she interviews founders, entrepreneurs, and other disruptors across various industries. Kara, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So we got to talk about Undaunted. This book is pretty unusual. There's a whole genre of books out there from CEOs and founders about, just how to build a business from the ground up, how to turn an idea into a multi-million dollar business. But yours has a different take that's a little unusual and very important and timely for what we're going through these days.
Yeah, it does. It's, I wrote this book. Actually, this book stemmed out of a journal. So for those journalers out there, doodlers, I mean, that's where this started. And I think just through telling my own stories, what I'm hearing from so many people who have heard me speak about it, but also have read the book, have really realized that they can actually do it, that I didn't have everything figured out. I didn't, or I should say, I did have failures along the way. I did have some challenges that I wasn't sure how I was going to get through, but knew that I needed to, or maybe not get through that one, but figure out another way to do something and not give up. And I think that the key thing that I've heard from people is that this book is so unusual from not just an existing CEO, but a female CEO who was also the founder. And apparently there are people who are kind of sitting in C-suite and CEO level roles who to people kind of moving up into those positions are not really hearing that things are hard. And yeah, we worked hard, but there were things that didn't always go the right way. And so that's really was the main reason why I wrote the book, was I wanted to not only share my stories because I felt that I wanted to get them out there in writing, but also more than anything, just I felt that I was in a position to help people, and not just how I did it, but also that you can do it. And it's just, you've got to figure out ways to do it.
Yeah. Now, authors and CEOs and business owners, they tend not to share the embarrassing stories or the things that would make them cringe if
Right.
that was told about them on a stage somewhere. But you kind of let it all out. And could you share one of those embarrassing stories so that our listeners could know how courageous you are and real?
Yeah. I don't know if it's courageous or a little bit crazy, right? As Steve Jobs used to say, listen to those visionaries, those founders out there, because they might seem a little bit crazy. And one of the stories that comes to mind that I share in the book is when I was getting the product on the shelf at Whole Foods, and I was pregnant with my fourth child. I had 4 children under the age of 6 when I decided to start Hint. I had made the commitment to myself about 6 months prior to starting Hint. When I found out I was pregnant shortly after this, I had written a short business plan for Hint, and decided, okay, I'm going to go figure this out and go launch it. And so I didn't want to give in to the fact that I was having my fourth child, but then I went through the process and also the pregnancy. And then towards the end, I had this whole idea that the product would show up at my house after had it manufactured in a plant in Chicago, and it was supposed to come 2 weeks prior to me having a planned C-section. And the thing about launches is that they're never on time, right? There's always some kind of delay along the way, and that was the case with Hint. I ended up getting the product the day before my planned C-section, and I had pallets of water sitting in my garage. I lived in San Francisco at the time, and having like parking inside of your house in a garage is a luxury, right? So I had my cars that were now trying to be parked out on the street. I'm having my baby. It was just from a convenience standpoint, I needed to figure out a way to get the pallets out of my garage, right? But yet I was having a child. So the morning I woke up, and I didn't have to be at the hospital until 2 p.m. I went over to my local Whole Foods and dragged my husband with me. He said, "You can't carry the cases in. You don't want to, you're having the baby this afternoon." And I ended up finding the guy that I had been talking to at Whole Foods who was merchandising the shelves. And he turned around and saw me and said, and I said, "Hi, do you remember me?" And he said, "Wow, you're really pregnant." And I said, "Yeah, I am." And he said, I went on to share with him about the fact that I had met him a couple of months ago, and we had talked about this product that I was developing, Hint. And I'm sure he didn't think that I was actually going to come back. But now here's this very pregnant lady standing right in front of him. And he said, "Are you going to have the baby in the store like any minute?" And I said, "Gosh, I hope not. I have to be at the hospital for a planned C-section at 2 p.m. And he said, "What's a planned C-section?" And I said, do you mean the difference between a planned C-section and an emergency C-section? Because I've had both, so I can share both with you.
Oh my
And
goodness. I
he
don't know if he
said,
was
"Yeah."
asking that kind of question, was he?
Yeah, and he said, and my husband poor Theo backed up into the fruits and vegetables section, thought, "Oh my gosh, she's really going there. She's going to explain where babies come from and what a planned C-section is." So he went and took a loop around the store and just let me kind of hang out there and watch the cases, and also explain to this nice gentleman about about childbirth. And 15 minutes later, my husband comes back and he said, "So, what's the deal?" And the guy was just in the process of saying to me, "Thank you so much for sharing that information with me." And again, of course, my husband's horrified by the whole thing. I'm, feeling pretty good because I've taken the time to educate somebody on, childbirth. And that's when I took the opportunity to ask him if I could get the product some shelf space in the cooler and, on the shelf. And he said, "There's no guarantees. I'll do my best." And, he obviously liked me at this point because I had taken some time to kind of spend some time educating him on something that he was curious about. But I left the store not really knowing whether or not, I had a product on the shelf or a done deal, however you want to look at it. And that's when the next day I got the phone call from after delivering my son Justin successfully. And he said, "I need you to get over here pretty quickly because we went through, actually," he said, "your 10 cases are gone." And I said, "Who took them?" Because I didn't see him put them on the shelf. So I wasn't sure that they were actually on the shelf. And he said, "No, they were sold, but I'm going to get in trouble with my manager if you don't, resupply the shelves." And so again, when I was in it, I didn't think it was funny. I was just doing what I was doing. And he obviously thought it was a little strange, but also the fact that he'll probably never forget that the founder and CEO of Hint actually told him, where babies come from. And I think that the lesson that I talk about in the book really is that, you build relationships with everybody, right? And sometimes building relationships is actually educating somebody. I mean, there's a lot of people who might have said, "Oh gosh, I'm not going to talk to him about this." And, they probably wouldn't have gotten very far with him because he had decision-making power. And again, but I didn't go into the store also thinking, okay, today I'm going to educate somebody about a planned C-section, right? Instead, I wanted this person to ultimately put my product on the shelf, but he was asking me a question and just having a conversation. And it ends up that when you are able to kind of service, right? And sometimes that just means just having a basic conversation and being yourself and satisfying curiosity with any level of the store. It doesn't have to be, somebody who is whatever, a higher level or something, but somebody who's got some power to be able to put your product on the shelf may also have questions and curiosity. So it worked out for me. It's a story that I think I've shared and certainly get some laughs in audiences. And I always think that it's one where there are a few people, typically men actually, that are sitting in the audience and sort of scratching down when I'm like saying the story, going, yeah, like, oh, that poor husband, poor Theo along the way. And so anyway, I find it really, really amusing, but it is a story that I think is there are many lessons learned in that for sure.
Well, for one, you connected with him on a human level. And I'm sure that helped to build the connection because people do business with people, not corporations doing business with other corporations. So that's an important one, I think. And also, it just shows how much chutzpah you have that you're just willing to go wherever it takes you and be helpful and not worrying so much about looking good or not looking bad, just being of service. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And I think here's the thing too, when I walked into this commitment of launching my company in an industry that I knew nothing about, I went down many, many levels, right? On sort of the ability to actually know something. And I was somewhat humored by it. I was just speaking about this the other day because I think this is a really, really important piece of kind of where we're at as a society as well, is that I was, prior to launching Hint, I ran AOL's e-commerce and shopping partnerships for 7 years. And I was one of the youngest vice presidents, one of the only female vice presidents in the company at the time. And it's fascinating because it was, I think about my time there, and when I decided to leave, it was $1 billion in revenue to AOL. I had 200 people that were working on my team. And I think that I kept saying things such as, I'm ready to move on. I'm not really challenged. I was also traveling a lot with my role. And so I sort of use that as an excuse to kind of get out. And I had these young kids that I wanted to spend more time with in San Francisco as well. But over the next couple of years, and certainly when I decided to launch Hint, what I realized is that as you move up the ladder, you also diminish your time that you spend learning, right? Instead, you're teaching and managing. You're not learning. And
well, unless you're Warren Buffett. He spends 5 hours a day reading.
Right. And I was always a big reader, but I guess it's just you're supposed to have the answers, right? And you're not supposed to be, you're supposed to be teaching, which is fine, right? But I also think that for so many, it causes burnout, it causes unhappiness, and it's really hard to articulate it because especially if you're, have lots of stock options, you've got the title, you're getting compensated in some way. It's very hard to describe that. And I even talk to people today who will share with me that, this feeling that they have. And I get it because I've been there, but the answer is not, I think I should probably just go join some boards. Like often, if you go join some boards, people are going to want you because of your experience, but often it's going to be more teaching, right? Versus actually going and learning something. And so most of the time, not all of the time, but anyway, I think that was I had really gotten to a point of being humbled, right? That I knew I was purposely putting myself into a position, and I knew I was smart and I knew I would eventually catch up, but I was the low person on the totem pole. I mean, I was not only sweeping out my garage to make sure that it was, cleaned up when the pallets came, but also, delivering cases into Whole Foods and making sure that they're on the shelf. That was not what I was doing before. And I didn't know, for example, the name of a cap is actually called a closure. So I was learning a whole new vocabulary. I was actually learning what a distributor was. And believe me, I looked for all of these answers. I was trying to read books prior to launching this company, but it just wasn't written out, and it was constantly changing too. And so there were lots of elements, but with all of that learning, what I realized for my soul, frankly, was that it was exactly what I needed. And so I was humored by the idea that I would walk in and actually educate. And in many ways, I wasn't educating anymore because I was like the clueless one, right, in the room, which I wasn't used to being.
Yeah.
And I loved it. And I think that so often, I mean, something I touch on in the book is, really putting yourself into positions of being a little bit uncomfortable. And I think that whether you want to be an entrepreneur, I just think that this is an everyday practice, that actually putting yourself into positions that call it fear, call it high probability of failing, not really sure exactly what direction you're going to go, is super healthy, because you know what? You'll probably actually get a lot more traction than you thought, and you become pretty proud of yourself. And the more of those times that you put yourself through, the more you will actually gain your confidence, right? I mean, so many people have said to me, how did you know how to manage during a pandemic? And, because I'm still the CEO of this company. And I think that being through challenging times, putting myself into positions where I wasn't really confident that we were headed in the right direction, but I tried. And I think that the more of those you stack up behind you, the better you are in being able to deal when you really have to.
Yeah. Well, to put it in Kabbalistic terms, I study Kabbalah. All those different challenges and hitting your limit where you didn't know
Totally.
the different things that you were supposed to know, all of that grows your vessel. And when you got to the point where, all right, we got a pandemic now and we need to pivot, or we need to make some changes here so that we can not only survive this, but thrive during it, that's something that you prepared for by growing your vessel through all of those various challenges. And I also love that you're going into a room as an absolute beginner and not just somebody who's kind of middle of the road, because that's intimidating for a lot of people. The old adage, if you're the smartest one in the room, you're in the wrong room, is a great bumper sticker, but when you're actually living it, it gets really uncomfortable, especially if you have an ego. Most of us do.
Yeah. No, and it does. And I mean, people used to say to me, okay, stop playing around. Like my friends in tech, that was my whole community. They'd say, oh, stop playing around. You're, why aren't you accepting these roles in Silicon Valley that are getting offered to you? And, you're just this is a little side hustle, this, whatever you're doing over here. And again, I think that the learning and the really, it was just humbling to me along the way too. And I loved it. And and again, my curiosity was able, every single day, I would look back on these things that I thought was hard and impossible, including figuring out vocabulary for a cap. I mean, as silly as these things sounded, they're stressful when you can't figure it out. When I'm sitting here trying to figure out how do I get a hold of somebody at Cisco, right, to distribute. I mean, most people like, would you know how to call up Cisco?
No, but I
Right?
would
I mean,
Google.
well, you'd Google, but then it's like, where do you go? And you go into this black hole,
Yeah.
right? Of, trying to figure. So again, there's just little things like that along the way, and a lot of those that I think you start to just, they become enormous, right? And I think that's another piece of this too, that it's, people always said to me when, or I've heard this many times, never look back. And I've always believed that looking back, you can actually take lessons along the way. Maybe, things that worked out, things that didn't work out, and why didn't they work out? And so I think that there's so much of that when you put yourself into places of just, being able to learn. And again, there's different phases along the way too, where there are times where you're learning, and then there's also times when you're teaching and you're mentoring, and I think that having that mix in your life and purposely trying to do that, I think is just really, really important. And frankly, something, as I've grown this company, something I really push on with our managers too, that I ask this question when people are hiring people on their team and, getting final approval from me to, actually make the offer. I always ask, what do they know that you don't know? Because I think that and it's not that I want them to feel inadequate, yet if you're not used to hearing that question, you're sort of taken aback, like, well, I know everything, of course, because, I'm still here at my company and you've had all this confidence in me. But what I'm asking is something that I've realized in my journey, that you need to hire people, call them smarter than you or know something that you don't. That's what keeps you engaged, right? That is about, and frankly, I think that's business and that's personal life. That if you are, that's certainly what I try and insert myself into now. I don't sit there and hang out with people that we're all the same, that we're, I want people that I'm curious and can satisfy my curiosity along the way. So I think that it stems into so many aspects, but it's something that I believe that like I said, happiness, being challenged, all of those things really, it just goes back to learning.
I think it kind of comes to this point of understanding what makes you tick, understanding your emotions and your unconscious motivators, being a student of your emotions even, right? So when you feel inadequate or you feel intimidated, sit with that, recognize it, be aware of your awareness, and then take a powerful next action instead of just going with your gut. Because it just seems to me like you are a master at emotional intelligence, and that is a big reason why you've been so successful.
Well, yeah, I think it's another thing that I've realized along the way too. And I would also, my husband is our chief operating officer, and I'd say that it's something that he's been so interested in too. First of all, we have very different skill sets. Most people, when they meet us, they'll realize we're very different people. We've been married for 25 years. We have 4 kids together. We run a company together. It works, right? But it's
that's impressive, by the way.
So it is, right? But I think it's just because we both appreciate one another's skill sets. And he's a, trained intellectual property attorney. He's very detailed. Which is, I'm broad strokes, right? And it works because we appreciate each other's. And that's, it's a solid way to actually build a family, I think, and also a company. But it's interesting because what we've also realized is that and he probably more so than me grew up with kind of being around a lot of the same people. His father was a doctor, a lot of scientists around him, and he just never really met, the street guy that was actually producing, working in a factory producing hint, right? And he found that those elements that he was most interested in science and were actually happening inside these factories. And you would meet somebody who maybe they graduated from high school, right? That would actually, you'd sit down with them and they'd say things that actually satisfied your curiosity, right? So again, kind of the least likely match, right? And, he went to all the right schools. He went, and worked in Silicon Valley doing amazing deals, all of that. And maybe some of these people that he's built relationships and really, really admire wouldn't even understand really what intellectual property was, right? But that's the thing, that he will happily insert himself into those conversations because he's like, wow, that's so interesting about, just the whole idea when we were launching Hint around, I wanted a product that did not have preservatives in it. And everybody in the beverage industry told us, you can't actually do that if you're using real fruit. And we kept asking an annoying question that my parents were so irritated with me in multiple situations throughout my life. Why? And I just said, okay, why? But I had permission to ask that because I wasn't from the beverage industry. And it was amazing to see somebody's face when I would see that they'd be getting kind of irritated. They think I was, flip or something. And then all of a sudden I'd say, I'm just so you know, I'm just asking because I don't actually come from this industry. I'm a consumer. I had this crazy idea for a drink. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, I actually don't know the answer to that question. I just work here. I just do this. And I'm like, well, are you curious about it? Kind of. And so that was the other piece of it too, that what I knew is when people got curious about it, then maybe 6 months down the road, I would go find somebody who would kind of add on to my information. And then I would go back to those people who were curious. I'd reach out to them and I'd say, hey, do you remember me? I was starting this crazy water company and I wanted to do this. I was in this factory in South Carolina and this guy that I met, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, that's really interesting. I never thought about that. And so it was this chain, right, that continued on and on. But again, getting back to the preservative conversation, ultimately we pasteurize our product and heat it. But conversations like that really came from just not really knowing what we were even asking. We didn't have any ideas, but we just kept asking the question. I view kind of the journey that I've had, and I always describe it to aspiring entrepreneurs, that I think that the most successful entrepreneurs are okay with not actually knowing that there's an end to the puzzle, right? That there are a lot of pieces that are thrown on. There's a possibility that some of the pieces are missing, and I'll just keep throwing more and more pieces on, and it's never going to end.
Yeah.
Right. And that is the perfect vision, because some people can't do it. Right. They're, what do you mean not all the pieces are here? What do you mean there's no end in sight? What do you mean I don't have the picture painted perfectly that I'm matching to? And that is the perfect vision for what successful entrepreneurs in any industry go through.
Yeah, it's like nothing is impossible. You remind me of Susie Batiste in that way. Do you know Susie?
I've heard her speak. I actually have not met her.
She is amazing. I've had her on the podcast. Love that episode. It's one of my favorites. She's so inspirational, and yeah, she just wouldn't take no for an answer. She wouldn't see any limits or anything is impossible, she would just plow through it and figure it out. And that's exactly what you did with finding an alternative to preservatives. I love that. Another example that I think is really inspiring and powerful that I'll quickly share. And this I remembered from your story about your husband, Theo, and how he would kind of get on the production floor and talk to everybody and kind of insert himself into the production line and learn what was happening and kind of get the inside scoop on things. So when I interviewed Scott Eck, he shared this fantastic story about the early days of the development of the space shuttle at NASA and how they could not figure out how to get the weight of the booster rockets down to acceptable limits so that it could take off. They had tried everything. They had taken all the unnecessary pieces off, or even the things that they're like, oh, we really should have this, but okay, we'll get rid of it so that we can get the weight down. And it was this one scientist who was willing to, or just not just willing, he was just a good guy. He would talk to the gate guard every day on the way in and on the way out. He'd, wish him a good day. He would be friendly and conversational. And one day, the gate guard said to him, "You look really troubled." And he said, "Yeah, we've tried everything. We cannot get those booster rockets to go underweight so that we are able to take off." And he's just stands there, looks at the shuttle with the booster rockets. "Why do you have to paint it?" And he's like, "Oh my God, that's it. We don't paint it." And sure enough, that's how they got underweight.
And that was it.
That was it. And it was the gate guard.
Interesting. And, the gate guard didn't think that morning when he came to work that he was going to come up with that.
That he was going to save the space program or something.
Right, that he was going to save it, right? I mean, that's the other thing. That's something that I learned in Silicon Valley at my first startup that was, 5 guys that used to work at Apple, all different, education levels and came from different experiences. And they were asking me what I thought about something because I had a different experience. I had been working at CNN and had been working in editorial at Time as well. But I remember hearing something that I think is so true for Silicon Valley overall, which is that ideas can come from anywhere. And I think that concept of just participating, you have to participate, is something that, frankly, I see in conferences now. I see in education, right? Where it's just, you can't just sit there and show up and listen, right? There's an interaction that is important. And frankly, you see it on social too, right?
Oh, the new Clubhouse app. I just go on there to lurk, and then they pull me on to be on stage, and then I start answering people's questions. I was not ready for that.
Right? And I think that's true, that it's really, I think that really is how things are done these days, and that people don't just sit there and think, okay, well, I'm the speaker at the conference, but I'm not going to learn something, from the audience or what have you. So anyway, I think it's an interesting realization. That was a great story that you told too, that it's, because I think it does happen in every single industry. Yeah.
Well, I'll share one more quick story that just blew my mind. And here's the thing is, like, in a book like yours, in Undaunted, you get to the real deal, kind of in the trenches stories that a lot of people aren't willing to share. Here's a story that blew my mind when I first heard it, and I don't think you'll ever see this in a book or hear it in a presentation. But boy, the chutzpah that this took. So this guy, I know he was a past guest on the show. I'm not going to mention his name because this is not something he wants to get out there associated with his name. But So speaking of Whole Foods, he had product that he wanted to sell. He wanted to get in Whole Foods. He snuck in some product, did some reverse shoplifting, put some product on the shelf, and then he got calls from the Whole Foods asking, where do we get this? We need to reorder it. We're out. This thing's just flying off the shelf. And they never asked, are you like a certified vendor? Like, how did you get in here or anything? They just saw that it was off the shelf and they needed to replenish.
That's
amazing.
Oh,
right?
that's crazy.
It is pretty
Yeah.
crazy.
Well,
and of course you can see why he wouldn't want his name associated with that, because that's a little gray hat, I would say.
yeah, absolutely. I'd be curious whether or not it could happen today in Whole Foods, because I think since the Amazon acquisition, I think they're a little more buttoned up than that. I mean, there's everything scans, et cetera. But I can imagine a day when, 15 years ago when we started at Whole Foods, even they had a local program that they really tried to put about 10% of the products that were produced locally on the shelf, and that's how we got in. And then once you do well, that's how you end up expanding into other territories, et cetera. But that's a funny story. It's a good one for sure.
Yeah. Now, was there a point where you just realized, wow, we made it? We finally made it. Maybe when Whole Foods said, all right, we're going to go from this region to rolling out the product nationwide, or you got, I don't know, a TED Talk or something, like some big event that was like, all right, now I've made it.
It's interesting. I think along the way we certainly have had some challenges, but then we've also had successes. And I think when I sold the first bottle in Whole Foods in the Bay Area, that's when I thought, okay, we're off to the races. It's going to be overnight success, right? The secret is that we weren't an overnight success. It was 15, I still consider us, even though we're the largest independent non-alcoholic beverage in the country that doesn't have a relationship with Coke, Pepsi, or Dr. Pepper Snapple. It took a long time to build it, and it ends up that most companies that are successful and kind of are building a brand that has staying power are probably older than even you would imagine. I mean, I still run into people who have never heard of Hint, right? And who are just kind of, I mean, I find it hard to believe because I live and breathe it, and it's in lots of stores that I go to, but some people don't go into stores, right? And certainly through the last year with the pandemic, maybe that's even increased to some extent. But it's definitely something that I think I've also felt that I would have this almost high of saying, okay, we can do it. It's all great. And then something else happens, right? Where, I don't know, your regional guy in San Francisco then decides to go to another company, and then all of a sudden you're like, then you have a low, right? And then you got to come back up because you got to train somebody and you got to go through this, and that is the story of the beverage industry, I think. But also, I mean, it's this juggle. It's this constant juggle. But somebody said something to me prior to actually launching our first bottle, that this guy Josh Dorff, and I'll never forget. He was sitting at my living room table. He had a company that actually his father started that was the first organic whole wheat flour company, and so of course I wanted to talk to him because he was like the Mecca, right? He had done it. He had gotten into Whole Foods. I thought, when am I going to get into Whole Foods? And he said something to me that I have sitting in my head as a great memory, a great learning memory, which is that this is pick and shovel work. And I remember writing down pick and shovel work, and then I thought, wait, what do you mean by that? And he said, you will get into Whole Foods one day, and you'll get into lots of other stores, and you'll have lots of success. But the most important thing to do is never feel like that's the only game in town, that you don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I made mistakes after that, putting all my eggs in one basket and multiple times, right? And I think, or maybe not all in one basket, but the majority of them all in one basket. And then it went away. And so I think that is such an important lesson, that if you get sort of enamored by a brand or a partnership, and say, oh, this is really comfortable. This is super fun to hang out here, and, throw all your marketing dollars in there, do this because this is all great. But if it goes away tomorrow, then it's not so great. Right. And so I think diversifying and to some extent what I've shared with entrepreneurs, which is sort of an extension of that statement, is that actually having relationships that you care so much about, that you are, enamored by, whether it's a Whole Foods or a Starbucks or whatever, it's great to have those. But get into positions where you can sort of visualize what life would be without them. And because they may decide that they're going to do something for their business that's better for their business. And again, that's something that you're like, oh no, we have a great partnership. We're all good. They're all nice, everybody. But it happens. Right. And sometimes those things, because you ultimately care about them because you had all your eggs in that basket, or too many of them in that basket. And so I think that is really an important lesson. And I think you can even extend that into, frankly, how you service the customer.
Well, it's
right?
a life lesson, I think. It's something that you can apply across
totally
your financial state. Like if you put all your liquid assets into crypto, for example.
Totally.
Oh my goodness, you're so exposed. Or if you're relying on all your traffic coming from organic search from Google, and then there's an algorithm update and you get wiped out.
Yeah.
Right. So I'll tell my clients, you need more diversity. Yeah, SEO is fantastic, and you're crushing it with regards to organic search, but what about some other channels? What about having another website? If you're relying on one website to produce all your revenue, and you're relying on one traffic source, and that's Google Organic, you are incredibly exposed.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think during the pandemic too, I think, for example, if you're relying on, let's say you didn't have the option for consumers to go and shop from you on your website. That is, I mean, it was crazy because there were systems that were beyond being overwhelmed through the pandemic, and during March, just as an example, that were software systems that used to allow the people working in the stores to know that they needed to reorder. And this, of course, came after that story that you shared about Whole Foods, that everything that they've got in the store is sitting in the software. Well, the software couldn't keep up with the demand in certain categories, like water or toilet paper or bleach or whatever. So it wasn't smart enough to know, oh, we've got to reorder. And so a lot of people said, oh my gosh, there isn't these products in the stores. And then the people in the store are saying, well, my systems are telling me that I don't need to reorder, but I just don't actually have it on the shelf. And so if you are sitting in that pickle, then you were kind of screwed.
Yeah.
And what I mean, you were. And so we had this business, that our direct to consumer business, but in addition, we also knew, just coming, I guess, from technology, that software sometimes has a hiccup and it hasn't seen certain things, and they didn't know how to solve for this. And so what we did was we got on the phone and called all these stores, and we said, hey, we don't know what's going on. We know you're really challenged right now. Can we just send a truck in? and of water, and we'll just stock the shelf. We'll figure out the payment stuff later, and we'll even send in people that are going to go and stock the shelves. And like 90% of them said, I'm in. Like, thank you so much. And, we'll call you in a couple of weeks once we figure out what's going on. But again,
That's amazing.
I think,
That,
right? But
so
again,
forward thinking.
understand,
Yeah.
yeah, but basic stuff, right? And how many manufacturers didn't do that? They just stopped, and they said, "Oh gosh, I don't know what's going to happen," And I mean, we were like, "Well, how do we fix it? What can we do?" Which I think is something that is also just so key.
Yeah. Well, what
But
you did in retrospect is just common sense, and it sounds like you're kind of downplaying how big of a deal that was, but common sense isn't that common, especially when your reptilian brain is running the show because you're in crisis mode.
totally. And I think it's also something that maybe is a little bit unique to people who have sort of grown up, in a system where they spend too much time teaching as well, where you aren't used to rolling up your sleeves and kind of getting dirty, right? And really understanding kind of how the processes work. I think that that's another thing that I've really been conscious about. And part of it, I think, is kind of growing up in startups too, that when, there's only 10 people in the room and you're doing a little bit of everything, and then you go hire people to finally take on that job. I know every single role in my company. I know SEO, certainly not as good as you. I know how to manufacture this product. I know how to go in and, I know a little bit about everything, enough to get me in trouble, as I always say. But I think that with that, even when I feel like I am a little disconnected on something, I want to go in and learn. And again, I think that that is my, curiosity, but that's my realization too, that during times when things are challenging, I can catch up pretty quick if I don't have to start from scratch.
Yeah, totally. So we're almost out of time, but I wanted to ask you one more question. It's kind of almost a spiritual or metaphysical question. Is there a particular moment or lesson or challenge or something that gives you goosebumps whenever you think about it? Because I'm recalling Brian Smith, the founder of Uggs, telling a story, which he was on the podcast as well, and he looks for these goosebump moments. He's like, "Oh, that gave me goosebumps." I'm like, file that one away, because that was like a direct connection with the creator, or that was like a download, or there's something really significant there. So I'm just curious if you can think of any kind of goosebump moments or lessons or anything.
I would say that there was one moment in 2017 that I had been in 2012. I was part of this program called by EY, formerly Ernst & Young, Winning Women. It's sort of for smaller companies that are kind of up and coming. And in the beginning of 2017, EY had reached out to me and said, "Hey, you're a Bay Area company. We really want to throw you into the mix of looking at companies that we really think are Entrepreneur of the Year." So Silicon Valley is made up of tech companies, right? So, I mean, that's what it's known for. And there's plenty of amazing examples of great tech companies in Silicon Valley that are bigger, all of these things. And so I got down to the final five, and I had a big event where I had a table, I had my friends there. I didn't even tell my friends that I just said, "Will you come to this? It's a great time to get dressed up." So I'll never forget my very oldest friends, like looking through the little pamphlet and sees my picture in there and says, "Wait, you're up for this award." And I said, "No, I'm not getting it. Like, don't worry." I mean, and my husband said, do you have a speech?" And I said, "No, it's like, don't even think about it. We can all have cocktails. We can all just like have a good time because there's lots of other companies that you've heard of in technology that are here as well, and they're going to get it. And I got it. And I get called to the stage, and I really did not believe that I mean, I still like talk about it. That's my goosebump moment when I just didn't think that, and I think it also took me back to really being humbled because I think that that's the other thing. I felt like this has been a journey and the journey isn't over yet. And so, to me, an entrepreneur of the year was kind of like a pedestal, right? Where that person has done it and they are of a huge region with like lots of people that are awesome. And here there were people who had said, no, it's you. You've done something that's really hard. And you've also done something where not a lot of women are supposed to be able to do this. And so anyway, when I got up on stage, did not have the speech, thankfully did not have a lot of cocktails in the midst of it either. It was interesting because my acceptance speech was truly from the heart. And I spoke about supporting the crazies and the people that actually have ideas that you haven't thought about and that you aren't sure how they're going to do it.
Yeah.
And I said, because those are the ones that you're missing, not only on the opportunity, but also the ones that could change the world.
Yeah.
And it was, and it got, I mean, it had a standing ovation. It was like crazy. And I was really, you could tell it was really from the heart. But I would say that was the moment, that where I finally felt, for whatever it's worth, recognized for all the hard work. But I wasn't even looking for it.
Yeah.
Right. It was just kind of came
great
to
validation.
me.
It's great validation.
It is. And it's, it's one that I think I think when you don't feel like you deserve it, right? That you look around the room and you think, wait, why didn't they get it? It's an interesting feeling, actually,
Sounds
because
a little bit
you
like
recognize
imposter syndrome.
it is. Well, I think it is, and yet I didn't deny that I had built something, with my team pretty great, but it was also, I think for me, I felt like there were a lot of other great people there too that had done something that I don't know, maybe I would have voted for, right? And I think that was anyway. I just think that was the thing where, and I think it speaks to great entrepreneurs that I think that they don't feel like they're done, right? That they've done something. They are constantly putting themselves into positions of how can we be better and how can we, go in places where maybe we didn't plan.
Yeah.
And I think that is, it is really what this journey is all about.
Breaking down doors, breaking glass ceilings, breaking glass houses. You've done all that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And we've talked a couple times about the crazy ones. I want to include in the show notes for this episode that Steve Jobs quote, "Here's to the crazy ones," because it is such a great quote, and I know that our listeners will get a lot out of it if they're not familiar with it or if they haven't memorized it. So I know we're out of time.
I totally agree.
So if our listener wants to read your book, Undaunted, where should they go? And if they want to follow you, learn from you beyond the book, where should they go for that as well?
Yeah, so the book's called Undaunted, Overcoming Doubts and Doubters, and you can go to karagoldin.com or you can go to Amazon and Barnes & Noble and lots of other booksellers as well and pick it up, or Audible as well. And I'm all over social at Kara Goldin with an I, so please come by and say hi, and hopefully you'll have a chance to read the book and let me know what you think.
Awesome. Thank you, Kara. This was fabulous.
Thanks so much.